So one of the big things that comes from World War One is an increasing use of women in warfare. Women have always been a part of warfare. So if you think back to the revolutions of 1848, women were fighting in the trenches. Women were working as nurses. Women are always there in some form or another. But World War One is kind of the first time that the government really recognizes the role of women and actively tries to recruit women to be part of the war effort. So women were part of the war effort in a variety of ways. Some of the ways were at home, and some of them were in the trenches. So, on the home front, either in Germany, France, England, where have you, women were encouraged to be part of the war effort in taking up what men had done. So, in reality, there were laws that said, okay, well, men can only do certain jobs, women can only do certain jobs. So, Britain, for example, passed a law saying that only men can work in the mines. Well, the men are going off to fight the war, so women are being encouraged to take off men's work in the mines. Men had been the ones working in munitions factories, so women are encouraged to go work in the munitions factories, and this is true for both World War One and World War Two. Women are also encouraged to work more in the fields and to work in agriculture, to take up the role of the farmers who had gone off to war. Now, this is really, really important. By World War One, more and more women throughout Europe and in America too had been getting jobs that were either in factories, not munitions factories, but other factories, or had been getting white collar jobs, such as working in stores, working as secretaries, working as teachers. Well, during the war, the various European governments start saying, okay, well, we need you to go and work in the fields. Please do this. We will pay you to do this. It is your duty to do so. And you can see that in the propaganda we have from England on the slide that says, get behind him, the girl he left behind him. Get behind the girl he left behind. Join the Land Army. And the Land Army was an organization in England that had women working in the fields. Women also, though, participated on the front lines, and they did so in two ways. The first way is as telephone operators, and the term they used to describe these women were hello girls. And so that's the top image I have here. So telephone operators were essential to getting those telephones working. At this time, in order for a phone call to go through, you need an operator to flip a switch and to change a line for a connection so that the phone call will go through. Okay, so we need someone to do this. They're recruiting women to do so. But they also needed bilingual women. The Allies were French, British, Belgian. They needed women who spoke a variety of languages. The Germans, most of the people who were allied with the Germans spoke German. So they didn't worry too much about bilingual unless they wanted the women to spy on the British allies. But for the British allies, they needed women who were bilingual, who could translate very, very quickly material that was being sent from a French general to a British general and vice versa, and do it accurately. Because if they didn't do it accurately, well, a lot of lives could be lost, and they didn't want that to happen. So these women were not part of the armies. They were paid, but they were not part of the armies. But they were put into positions of immense trust and immense power that if they wanted to, they could have just randomly changed an order. They didn't, as far as we know, but they could have. And their work was kind of key to keeping the war going. Without it, orders during various battles would never have occurred. Another role women had during during World War One, related to their roles in the medical corps. So women worked as drivers, ambulance drivers, and they also worked as nurses. both roles had women right up on the trenches. So as ambulance drivers, during a battle, women would be the ones going to the trenches, getting the wounded in the midst of battle, and driving them home again. Not driving them home, driving them to the Army hospitals. The Army hospitals, there were two types. Some of them would be right by the trenches, so maybe a mile back, not very far. Some of them would be further back, and women would be the ones doing the driving to these various hospitals in the midst of battle. I want to emphasize this, in the midst of battle. Moreover, these women are the ones who are responsible for their cars. So they were trained to be mechanics. Moreover, most of the time when they signed up to do this ambulance work, they had to have been a mechanic beforehand or they would not have been accepted. Later on, by 1916, little later in 1915, mainly by 1916, the Army was just so desperate for drivers that they're like, yeah, we'll train you. But beginning in the war, you had to be a mechanic in order to be considered for this role as an ambulance driver. And this tells you how many women were mechanics on their own. That's really important that they knew how to drive and they knew how to work the cars. Very, very important. Women also worked as nurses in these field hospitals. So these hospitals were usually half a mile from the trenches. Many of them were actually hit by fire. Sometimes it was enemy fire. Sometimes it was an accidental home fire. It was just accidentally hit. And these women were doing nursing work right by the front lines. And they're doing it on a regular basis. Now, the women who served on the front lines also suffered from shell shock. And they were not considered to be part of the Army. So after the war ended, they were never treated for shell shock. And they were never given government benefits. And that was a major concern, and that's not something that would change until the Cold War. That being said, while women did not get treatment, various countries did try to recognize women's roles in the war by granting them suffrage. So on the slide, you can see the various countries that granted women suffrage. Denmark is the earliest country that grants women suffrage soon after war breaks out. And it goes all the way through 1920, where we see various countries granting women the right to vote. This was done so as a response to women serving in the war. And you can see that sometimes the countries would initially grant women suffrage if they had served. So in 1917, Canada grants women suffrage if they were a war widow, so if their husband had died, or if they had served. In 1918, the United Kingdom granted women suffrage only if they'd served. So there is a level initially of saying, okay, well, we're doing suffrage if you served, but on the whole, women's suffrage picks up in the 19-teens and early 1920s because of the fact they had served in the war. That being said, France, the group that promote the idea of equality, liberté, égalité, fraternité, the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, doesn't grant women the right to vote until after World War II. Good job, France.